Good morning, everyone. Well, as most of you heard, you heard that I had COVID, and I'm fine. It wasn't too bad. It's still lingering a little bit, like I'm negative, testing negative, but I don't know, it just sticks around like it does for many people. So, I feel a little sad that the seminar needed to be rescheduled. Maybe that's inconvenient for you, that would be sad, but also I had hoped that we would have like a weekend to get into the text of the Genjo Koan, more time. And now it's like there's this one talk, and then there will be the seminar, and it's going to be just fine. But little things like that, little objections that we have to reality, are always interesting to me. It's like, I wanted something to be a certain way, and then it's not that way. Are you familiar with those situations? Yeah, this is interesting. And I think it's a real existential pattern that we have to deal with in our lives if we want to be liberated in accord with Buddhist teachings. Illness, I said this just yesterday when we had tea after Zazen. Illness is a great opportunity to practice, because illness is universally unwanted. It's like you don't want it. And yet, it is completely part of our existence. You can't eliminate it. In fact, I think it's questionable whether we would want to eliminate it. I mean, according to, because bacteria and viruses are part of the biosphere and are, on the whole, supporting us to live, there are going to be bacteria and viruses that that make our body ill, and so our immune system co-evolves with those illnesses and gets trained every time we get sick. So do we really want to eliminate it? It's like, I think people who study immunology realize that if you cut off every infection with, say, anti-bacterial medicine, you weaken the immune system. So everything it's just one example of how everything is interrelated and not so simple. And how do we open up to the complexity of our actual existence? The image that I carried with me in the past week is this very well-known and much used image of water and waves. It's like we exist as a wave. Okay, but we coexist with all other beings as a field of waves. And all beings are water, but take different shape as different waves in different locations and in different forms and shapes. This is the image of how we exist in Buddhism. It is an image both of impermanence, because each wave is fleeting in its form and shape and changes all the time. And it is an image of interdependence, because no one of these waves in this field exists independent of the other waves. If other waves change, this wave changes. This is like, that's, in that sense, it's a very powerful image. That contains a lot. Now, in a way, it's like practicing Buddhism is kind of simple. Just see yourself as that wave. So when you change, say become ill, in relationship to what these other waves are doing, like a viral load comes to you as a wave, you become ill. Okay, so what? Now you could say, but what if this viral wave kills me? Yeah, that too is okay from the point of view of the large, wide ocean. Now we can object to our own mortality. It's like, I don't think it's a particularly successful strategy. It's going to happen, and we are not in control of when and how. So our practice might be to open up to the impermanence of our wave-like nature. It's like it is there for a while and then it dies. It's more complex than that because our interest in being alive, our interest to stay alive, is also part of this complex field of waves. And in order to be a wave, you need to have an interest in staying alive, so that's fine. And then medicine is not included. Like, use it to the degree that it's there. You know, it's like, it's all actually part of that large field. Okay, so in the last talk I discussed the meaning of the title Genjo Koan, and I said Gen means to appear, and Jo means to complete. So Genjo means to complete that which appears. And Ko means the universal, and An points to what is unique or particular. So Genjo Koan means something like to complete that which appears is simultaneously unique and universal. It's in that image. It's like you enter into the activity of being a wave, complete that which appears, knowing yourself and other beings, other appearances, as both water and wave. To the degree that from the point of view of the water, you know, all waves are water. From the point of view of the wave, each wave has a unique form and shape. So the simultaneity of the universal and the unique is realized in each moment, in each action, in each being, in each appearance. This is sort of the title primes you for everything that comes in the text. So then I brought the text because I know, after working with 4 translations, I can't. I mean, I sort of have it memorized, but not. I want to be accurate. I'm using Shohaku Okamura's translation mostly for this talk. So the first sentence is, when all dharmas are the Buddha Dharma, there's delusion and realization, practice, life or birth. I prefer birth here. It conveys something different. I'll get to that. There's delusion and realization, there's practice, there's birth and death, and there are Buddhas and living beings. Then let's look at the second sentence right away, when the 10,000 dharmas are without a fixed self, maybe we could say in our language, without identity, without a fixed identity, when the 10,000 dharmas are wave-like activities that cannot be pinned down, there's no delusion and no realization, no Buddhas and no living beings, no birth and no death. Okay, the first thing to recognize here is he's saying the opposite in the first two statements. He's saying like, there is delusion and realization, and then he says, there's no delusion and realization. Okay, well, off to a good start here. Okay. These two statements contain, like, more than 1,500 years of Buddhism. Development of Buddhism in two statements. This is a lot. And so when you read it, it's like you can let yourself be touched by it, confused by it, not, like Dogen says in one point in his teachings, you can practice not understanding. But there are certain elements of how Buddhist views are expressed in words that we have to sort of learn. If you don't know them, it's very difficult to let the text really speak to you. So one thing that we really need to know or understand is what a dharma is, or what this concept of a dharma is. Now the word dharma has lots of meanings. One way it's used here as Buddha dharma is it means the teaching, Buddhist teachings, or the teachings conveyed by the Buddha. But a dharma is, as I learned from my teacher and really appreciate this understanding, is a unit of experience. A unit of experience both spatially and temporally. So it's a moment of experience, and it's a unit in the sense that now if I look at you, I'm the focus of my attention lifts you out from the field. So, and for that moment of beholding what is in focus of attention, this becomes one dharma. And so that's also appearance. A dharma is an appearance. And it's not an objective thing that is divorced of the mind that perceives the thing. The dharma is perceived by the mind. It's what appears. When you say appearance, it implies it appears in the mind. So, you and I can look at the same object, this bell, right? But the result is not the same appearance because there's perspective. So there's visual perspective from where you're looking, right? Your standpoint. But if you extend the idea of perspective, there's perspective in the greatest subtlety. Like, my nose is different than yours, and so we don't smell the same smell, even though that's not dependent on where we're positioned as much as the visual is if we're in the same room. But still, if the source of the smell is there, and so forth. But our nervous systems are different. This is something that is being discussed more now. It's like neurodiversity, right? It's like what is perceived, reality, as it appears, is not independent of what perceives it. Okay, all that is part of the understanding of a dharma. It's a unit of experience. It's not objective. It's also not subjective in the sense that we're just making it up. It is an appearance. It is one wave conditioned by innumerable other waves that surround it. The whole complexity of the world is involved in the appearance of one dharma. That's the understanding of a dharma. Now, all dharmas, side by side, are this way. When all dharmas are the Buddha Dharma, then there is delusion and realization and these other things that he's mentioning, and we can get to that. Okay, so what's the Buddha Dharma? It's the teaching of the Buddha. So here the word dharma means something different, but it's an interesting link. Like when all dharmas are perceived through the lens of the Buddha Dharma, then there's delusion and realization. Okay, so what is the Buddha Dharma? So now you need to know Buddhism, or else you don't know what he's saying, right? Dogen knows Buddhism. He's been around those teachings, so he's like, okay, so the Buddha Dharma. Let's say the Buddha Dharma is the Four Noble Truths. That's the first teaching, that's the most fundamental teaching. Let's just say the Buddha Dharma is the Four Noble Truths. Then, how this reads is, when all dharmas are perceived in relationship to suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path to end suffering, then there is delusion and realization. Yeah, because you can apply the Buddha Dharma, or you cannot apply it. If you don't apply it, you are deluded, and that delusion leads to suffering. Or you can apply it, and then you are liberated from delusion, and that's called realization here. So there's delusion and realization, and there's practice, because you need to practice to apply the Buddha Dharma to all dharmas, to all appearances. In each situation, you are challenged to apply the Buddha Dharma. There's birth and death. Let's read that as there is appearance and disappearance. And they're Buddhas and living beings. Living beings are those who are, in delusion, and there are Buddhas who are realized people. What's the cause of suffering? The cause of suffering is grasping and resisting. When something appears and you grasp it and want to make it permanent or want it for yourself, you are in delusion. When you release that grasp, you practice realization or liberation from suffering. When you want your experience right now, not some other time in the future or in the past, right now, if you want your experience to be other than it is, you practice delusion. If you release your experience as it is right now from resisting it as it is, you practice realization. So when all dharmas are the Buddha Dharma, you have the contrast between delusion and realization. You have the contrast between Buddhas and living beings. Then, he says, when the 10,000 dharmas are without a fixed self, a fixed identity, then there's no delusion and no realization. There are no Buddhas and no living beings, and there's no birth and no death. That's the teaching of the Heart Sutra. That's the teaching of emptiness. So, but let's look first at this interesting replacement of all with 10,000. When all dharmas are the Buddha Dharma, and then he says, when the 10,000 dharmas are without a fixed self, without a fixed identity. 10,000 means all. Okay, but there's something, all, when you say all, it's like a concept, and it that pretends that allness could be perceived or something, as if allness is something that, but all is infinite. And we can perceive infinity. It's beyond our grasp. But 10,000 is actually something you could count, right? You could count from 1 to 10,000. It would take a while. So 10,000 actually brings all dharmas into the realm of experience, actual experience. You're not treating it as something abstract. So 10,000 becomes a metaphor for concretely experienced dharmas. There are many, infinitely many, but they are perceived one by one. They come into our field of perception one by one. They're also infinitely connected, so when one dharma comes into the field of perception, all others are implied, because all others have helped to shape that wave. So there's an allness implied in the one by one. That is the universal and the unique, simultaneously present. And it's alluded to in this shift from all to 10,000. The 10,000 is more like the unique, each one by one, and the allness is pointing to the universal. So it shows up right there, like what is in the title. Dogen is just masterful in, I said he's writing poetry, right? He's just replacing one. You could read over this and say like, I don't know. But it could also make you stop and it's like, what's going on? Like, why would he choose to do that? Now, we don't have time, I think, to go into the Heart Sutra. Chant it every day. For those of us who do that after Zazen. And when you chant it every day, it sort of becomes part of you. You kind of know it. Maybe you couldn't recite it exactly, but some things, stick. Like, no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. No attainment. Really? This is outrageous. Like, no attainment. No path. It's like everything in this Heart Sutra contradicts the Buddha Dharma. No feelings, no perception. No, these are the five skandhas. The five skandhas are the most often mentioned, the Buddha, most often mentioned teaching by the Buddha in the sutras. So all that also not. Great. Where does it say this? The dharmas do not neither appear nor disappear. The main teaching of Buddhism is that things appear and disappear like waves. And then the Heart Sutra says, no, they don't appear or disappear. So Dogen is replicating this. He's using three things here: delusion and realization, Buddhas and living beings, and birth and death, which is appearance and disappearance, and says no. So he's teaching here like the Heart Sutra. How do we make sense of this? Now, of this one sentence, but also of the Heart Sutra. So, historically, it's the teaching, Nagarjuna's teaching of emptiness, which launches, among other things, launches what is now understood as Mahayana Buddhism. Right? It's expressed in this negative way of speaking, in this denial, this crossing out of linguistic determination. And emptiness, you could say, is emptiness conceptually. Experientially, maybe a different story, but conceptually, which is useful to begin with, if you can remember those two things that I'm now saying, is you have an access to emptiness. If you don't remember it, you don't. Emptiness means impermanence and interdependence. If you say that something is empty, a dharma is empty, this object that you're looking at is empty, the self is empty, what you're saying is it's impermanent, it changes. It's not the same over time. And it's interdependent. Its change is conditioned by everything else changing. This is the wave image. The wave is empty because it changes, and because it changes in relationship to other waves. And this, Buddhism teaches, is true for all things, for all dharmas. Right? Actually, this is important to note, we don't have in Buddhism a notion of thingness. We may say thing, but if you say thing, always hear dharma. There is no thing because the word thing implies permanence and independence. If you say there's this thing and you say I can study it and I can study its attributes, you sort of have to assume that there is permanence in that thing, because otherwise how does it make sense to study its attributes? Like, if you want to produce knowledge that lasts, you have to assume permanence, at least continuity, something that remains the same. And if something remains the same, it's an essence or an identity. And we can put different words into that slot: self, essence, identity. Emptiness, the concept of emptiness, the teaching of emptiness, the practice of emptiness is to deeply question and then realize that these concepts of essence and identity are not capturing how reality is. So please feel free to disagree, right? That's great. Maybe you disagree and say, well, then there's no science, or then We can't rely on anything, right? Yeah, okay, now you're disturbed. This is good. If you just say, yeah, I understand, then nothing happens. It's not. This is disturbing. It is counterintuitive in many ways. It grates against many things that our culture takes for granted. And it is meant to be a liberating teaching, because to believe otherwise is delusion. So, Dogen is saying when the 10,000 dharmas are practiced and realized as empty, then we can use this no language. What is this no about? Okay, so let's go to these outrageous statements that the Heart Sutra is making. The Heart Sutra is saying there are no eyes, no ears, no nose. There's a famous scene in the Koan literature where Dongshan, the young Dongshan, who's the founder of our lineage in China, where Dongshan hears the Heart Sutra and says, no eyes, no ears, no nose? You kidding me? I'm paraphrasing. You kidding me? I have eyes, I have ears. He's saying this to his teacher, right? I have a nose. Please make sense of this for me. And the teacher says, sorry, can't make sense of this. You've got to see someone else. And we should be like the young Dongshan. We should, be startled by this and say, I have eyes. How come this revered Buddhist text says to me that there are no eyes? And that there's no path and no attainment. All these things that the Buddha Dharma teaches, if you just take them all away, what remains of the teaching? Okay, so now, if no is the marker for saying that the eyes are empty, if this is the linguistic way of conveying the teaching of emptiness to all these aspects of our existence, eyes, ears, nose, but also suffering, path, no suffering, great, and then there's no reason to practice, but it applies this marker of emptiness to each of these aspects of existence, let's say, all aspects, all dharmas. Anything we can identify is marked as empty in a litany of recitation. Empty, 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 empty. Again, like I said, that means the I is impermanent and the I is interdependent. The I does not exist as a separate unit. The I is interdependent with the whole body. But not only is it interdependent with the whole body, it is interdependent with what it sees. The I has evolved through what it learned to see. The I is still in a process of evolution. The I is a process. It's not a thing. The nose is not a thing. It's a process. The nose is changing. It's aging, that's one. The eye is aging. Some of us know that very well. But it's also evolving. We are in the making. This is emptiness. So, the no is to deny that these aspects of our existence come to us as separate units that we can, grasp. Now, grasping here means grasp conceptually or cognitively. One way you can read this is, it's always more complex than anything you can think or say about it. Always more complex. Emptiness points you to that complexity. It's a practice of humility too. It's like, we can't know once and for all, and you see this, yeah, science is possible, but science is evolving. Everything we can say, it may be useful what we can say, what we can find out, but it's not the end, it's not the last word about reality ever. There's always more, or there's always a different perspective. Another way of looking at things. A deeper way, a shallower way, a way that's more practical. Newtonian physics is wrong, now that we have Einsteinian physics. It's not correct. It's still pretty practical to know that things fall down. It's good enough for me, actually. It's been enough to understand Newtonian physics. I have trouble grasping what Einstein is saying. Most of us do, I think. Okay, that's emptiness. And now when you apply that, welcome Dogen. Do you want to sit or you just want your debit card? Yeah. Hello. Yeah. So, for example, if you treat delusion as a thing, or if you really treat realization as a thing, it's incorrect from the point of view of emptiness. It's incorrect. So it's like, here's this thing, delusion as an attribute of this self, right? What, permanently, or how do you get rid, if you have an attribute of a fixed self that you call delusion, how is it ever going to leave you? So to say there's no delusion and no realization doesn't deny that we suffer or are liberated from suffering. It means that delusion is not a fixed thing, and realization too is not a fixed thing. So it is helpful to look at everything as momentary appearance. Maybe momentariness, which is, so you could say, yeah, impermanence is a good teaching, right? You understand that everything is changing, but it's not a practice. Momentariness is a practice. You enter into this moment and you notice, feel the momentariness of it, its fluidity, its ungraspability. As it arises, it's already gone. So there's this paradox, right? On the one hand, what we experience right now exists. Here it is. But in the language of emptiness, it doesn't exist because it cannot be grasped. It's already eluding our grasp. as it moves into the next moment. So there is no delusion and no realization as fixed entities, as fixed attributes. There are moments of delusion, we could maybe say, if we want to bridge this. There are moments of delusions, and there are moments of realization. There are moments of samsara, and there are moments of nirvana. There are moments of suffering, and there are moments of liberation. When there's resistance, there's a moment of suffering. When there's no resistance, there's a moment of liberation. We all know moments of not resisting and grasping, so we all know moments of liberation. If you think, I'm deluded and I want realization, you are separating yourself from the moments of liberation that you already have experienced. You follow? So in that sense, to say there's no delusion and no realization is liberating, because it liberates you to savor the moments of liberation that come to you, maybe sometimes without effort. Sometimes with effort and sometimes without effort. Who knows? Also, we don't have to divide the world into living beings and Buddhas. Like, here's like first and second class practitioners. There are Buddha moments and there are ordinary moments. Then Dogen says, as another version of presenting the teaching, since the Buddha way, by nature, goes beyond the dichotomy of abundance and deficiency. You could say beyond the dichotomy of existence and non-existence, or the dichotomy of form and emptiness, right? Of there is and there is not. The Buddha way by nature goes beyond this. Okay, so first, the Buddha way is the practice of the Buddha Dharma. It's not just like some theory. It's when you practice the Buddha Dharma, you are not boxed in by its presentation in early Buddhist teachings or Mahayana teachings of emptiness. You're not boxed in by this. It's not like one way or another. In your practice, you go beyond it. Then, if it is such, if you go beyond it, then there is arising and perishing. There is coming and going. There is delusion and realization. There are living beings and Buddhas. So, Dogen gives himself and us permission to return to a positive language after having gone through the teachings of emptiness, because it's like, how can I say this? If you just treat form as form, right, then most people, most of us, will... This almost like evolutionarily grounded habit of grasping something as permanent or somewhat semi-permanent or independent. This is this thing and I can grasp it and deal with it and take control of it and so forth. This will be activated if you don't practice. It may be practiced subconsciously, you don't even notice that that's what's happening. If you go through the liberating practice of emptiness, you realize that each form is just a wave. It's just this Dharma appearing is not permanent, is interdependent with everything. So you're emptying it. Form is emptiness. As a practice, we have to practice emptying form. That's what the Heart Sutra does. But if you continue to perceive the dichotomy between form and emptiness, it's sort of like you're always stepping outside of reality to realize something is empty. It's like a distancing. Right? But if it becomes automated, so what I hear Dogen saying, if it becomes automated, then form is immediately empty form. Form is form. We can use a positive language. If we realize form is empty form, yeah, then we can say it. We can name the nose, we can name the eye, we can name realization, we can name delusion. Because it does help us to identify a moment of delusion, a moment of resistance and grasping, a moment of being free from resistance and grasping. We call it this and we call it that. If we don't relate to it as some thing, or some stable attribute of ourselves or of a thing. All right? Incredibly rich, right? Like the history of Buddhism in 3 sentences. Then, therefore, this translation says it this way, therefore flowers fall even though we love them, and weeds grow even though we dislike them. So on the surface, I think this is very understandable. It's sort of like reality doesn't give a hoot what you think or what you prefer. It just doesn't care. If you don't like the flowers falling, they fall anyway. He's summarizing something here. It's like okay, now we've gone through the teachings of Buddhism, the various ways we can articulate them and experience them and practice them, and flowers fall even though you don't like that. And weeds spread even though you really don't like that. Okay, and you hear that, right? Illness comes even though you don't like it. Good experiences don't stay. And your struggle is irrelevant. Your struggle to make something stay or to make something go away is irrelevant to how reality works. That's how it reads on the surface, I think. And it's in line with Buddhist teachings. Now, let's switch, also just as an exercise, let's switch to a different translation, since we can't read the original. So Kaz Tanahashi, he was very affiliated with San Francisco Zen Center and sponsored a long time by San Francisco Zen Center and Zenki Roshi, produced these translations of Dogen. He and his collaborator, I forget who it is, for the Genjo Koan, but he collaborated with Westerners on each of the fascicles. In attachment, flowers fall, and in aversion, weeds spread. So what he's not doing is he's not spelling out the relationship between flowers falling and our love for the flowers as even though, right? Flowers fall even though we love them. He just says, in attachment, flowers fall. And this opens up another dimension. If there, let me put it this way. If there wasn't any attachment, would we even perceive the flower as falling? Because the word falling already implies something. the word flower, and this is poetry, right? So we can put other things than flowers here, all the things that we like and love. Would we call something a flower if we didn't also find it pleasant? But read this as a metaphor. Hear this as a metaphor. I think another reading here is our grasping and resisting shapes and constructs what we perceive as reality. It makes us look at things differently. So what we perceive as reality already has, that process of perception has already built into it, like likes and dislikes, love and hate. Yeah, you follow that? That could be a whole talk. Now, how language, we sometimes think like, oh, language is just naming things neutrally. But this would be saying, no, we're not naming things neutrally. The way we name things, based on our perceptions, is already conditioned by likes and dislikes. We see the flowers falling and we see the weeds spreading. It's just organic matter doing stuff. Why are we not seeing the weeds as flowering, flourishing, doing great? No, but we say weeds spread, and when we say weeds spread, that already implies something that is harmful or not wanted. One of the things that seem among this kind of group, it seems obvious. I've said something to that effect before. It's like we think that the threat to democracy that is happening in our political system right now is just a problem. It's like weed spreading. Like we need to weed it out. This challenge to democracy, it just has to go away. This is obvious. Because democracy is a flower. And it shouldn't fall. And this questioning of democracy is a weed and it's spreading, oh my God, has to be reined in. This is clear to us, right? Like those of us in this room right now. Is it so? What if democracy has become, under our historic conditions, dysfunctional to solve the main problems of the world? Isn't that true? I don't think, personally, let me disclose that, I don't think that the climate catastrophe is going to be solved by democracies. Because people have to vote against their own interests, like their personal interests. And they were not going to do that. I mean, we're not going to find majorities, is what I think. This is tragic. But maybe that means democracy actually has to go away to solve those problems. Here, I'm not making I'm just, playing around. Dangerous play. No, but it's not illogical. What I'm saying is maybe democracy as a political system is not up to the task. So we need something new. How does the new come into the world? First, it needs to be challenged. Something needs to be challenged so that democracy can evolve. Let's say we need democracy 2.0 or 3.0, and we don't know yet what that is. So maybe we need to allow a challenge. We just didn't want it this way. So what this teaching challenges us to do is to widen out and actually allow weeds to be part of our life. It's almost like we don't quite know what they're good for. Surely using herbicides on a mass scale has not done only good by getting rid of the weeds. Okay, I just ask you to hear more in this than just weeds. Everything we perceive with aversion and are so sure about that's a bad thing is questioned here. There's another reading, and then I need to close. I also read here, and this is something really important to me, because I didn't understand this for a long, long time. The practice of the Buddha way is not about transcending your humanity. It is about arriving more fully in it. And something that is quite beautiful here in this line is one of my favorite lines. Yet, in attachment, flowers fall, and in aversion, weeds spread. It is a statement about our humanity. We will not overcome loving flowers and being repelled by weeds. This will continue. It's like, even though all of this is true, all these teachings, ways of talking about Buddhism are true, in attachment, flowers fall. This conundrum of being a being that has grasping and resistance built into it will not go away. You're not going to transcend that. You practice with it endlessly, which is something we'll touch on later in the text when Dogen says that the no trace of realization continues endlessly. This path is not, you're not done with it, because you don't transcend this human condition.